Welcome everybody. Brian Hoops here with Midwest Market Solutions, our monthly supply and demand webinar. And today is Friday, August the 10th. We had a bearish report out today. And here to talk about it with me is Bruce Guy from our Roseau, Minnesota office. He is in the heart of the spring wheat belt. And so loved having you on here, Bruce, to talk about this report, spring wheat, and how's things going today?
Well, going pretty good. Uh, we haven't really gotten into the harvest in our area yet, but on my way to town this morning, I did see one small field that had been taken off. So I would suspect today and through the weekend it's going to be pretty hot and heavy. So.
I wanted to ask you about that. First of all, why don't you give our listeners and maybe some of our clients who are not familiar with yourself a little bit of background info on you and where you're located, because you are a branch office of Midwest Markets.
Yeah, so I'm the furthest north, I believe.
I believe you are. You're almost up there by Winnipeg, right? All the way up to Canada.
Yeah. So geographically, we are 10 miles south of the Canadian border and 70 miles east of the North Dakota border. So right up there in northwest Minnesota, just about as far as you can go. So yeah. And then myself, I've been in the ag business for over 20 years. Most of that was primarily in ag equipment business. So when I left that to come to here, it was a career move for myself, and I've really enjoyed it so far. So yeah, learned a lot since I've been here. And of course, the other part of our business here is crop insurance, both the multi-peril and private products. So.
Yeah, I know you and Jody are very busy up there in Minnesota taking care of, like you said, crop insurance clients, but also clients that want to do hedging, speculation, and I think I mentioned at the beginning, and you started talking about you're in the heart of spring wheat country. What are the main crops up there besides spring wheat?
Well, in this area, it's pretty diversified. So there's wheat, obviously, and soybeans are the two main crops grown here. But this year, I've seen a little bit of a resurgence of sunflowers around. So they kind of come and go over the years. I suppose some of that has to do with disease and whatnot. And ryegrass is a big crop here. So those that are looking to harvest ryegrass, they actually underseed that in their wheat fields. So last year when they had a field that was wheat that they underseeded, so they'll be harvesting that ryegrass this year. Canola is also a pretty good sized crop up here. And at one time, Kentucky bluegrass was actually a pretty big thing. Well, then that market kind of fell off, with the housing crash and all that kind of stuff. But there are a couple of producers around here that are starting to make a bit of a comeback in that. So yeah, there's quite a bit of variety up here, and the grasses were grown just because of the certain climate. So.
And you said at the beginning of our program here that a little bit of harvest activity starting to take place. Forecasts are for pretty warm, dry conditions, so you anticipate producers are going to make pretty rapid progress by next month.
Yes, I believe so, because our 10-day forecast doesn't really show anything for moisture in it, but it's just like any other thing. The way it's been happening this year, you see nothing on the radar, and a few hours later, then there's a storm that brewed. So
right. And are your clients expecting decent yields this year, or what's the optimism like?
Well, I think the optimism is actually pretty high. Some of the producers that I've been visiting with, a lot of them are expecting north of 65 bushels to the acre. So it's been an ideal year for them. As far as the timely rains this spring and what have you. Even though we have only had maybe a couple of inches of rain since June, so the soybeans are going to start feeling it here pretty soon. So
absolutely,
if we don't get some rain. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about this report here, Bruce. A lot of surprises, I think, coming into the trade. A client made a comment to me that big crops tend to get bigger, and that's what we saw from the USDA in today's report. Look first at corn, and a couple things that jump out to me if we look at corn. I'm circling the yield numbers here from the USDA, 178.4 versus last month of 174, so a jump of 4.4 bushels per acre. It's also above last year's crop of 176.6. Soybean production even larger at 51.6 bushels per acre, and both of these are above the average trade guess. Now we've got the USDA coming in last month at 48.5 and a year ago at 49.1. So your reaction, Bruce, to these production numbers? I mean, were you shocked, taken back by these figures from the USDA? Because the market certainly was.
Yeah, I guess I was, but when you look at, especially when you look at these Informas and some of these other private outfits, the one that really stood out to me was the soybean yield. I mean, I kind of think some of those estimates on the corn were in that 177, 78 range somewhere. So I wasn't as surprised about the corn as I was on the soybeans.
Okay, yeah, I agree with you. I think the corn number here is real justified, and and I'm not surprised by it. The soybean number, I was surprised because you made the comment you've had very little rain since June the 1st. Des Moines, Iowa is kind of the center of the country, and a lot of traders will look at what weather is done in Des Moines to give a huge overview of what is going on around the Midwest, and they have had the driest July in history, or the second driest in history, and that should impact yield on soybeans. So I was more surprised that the soybean yield was bumped up 3.1 bushels per acre from last month. That was a shock to me.
Yeah, me too. So,
all right, let's go to the next slide here. I can figure out how to use the system. Okay, so we'll look at ending stocks here now. And we've got old crop and new crop here, and I want to look mostly at this new crop ending stocks. The corn number came in at 16.84 billion bushels. Soybean number, I think, is the big surprise here because of the production number was so large. 785 million bushels of ending stocks for soybeans, well above last month. You go back to 580 last month, and well above last year. And the corn was actually below year ago levels, even though we've got more corn bushels per acre than a year ago. And the wheat did come down from last month by 50 million bushels, but a big sell-off in the wheat market here. So what do you think on these numbers, Bruce?
Yeah, like in our area, most of the producers that I've talked to, there's a couple of them that still have old crop in the bin, but not very many. So I tend to think, looking at these numbers that and not knowing exactly what the protein discounts are going to be at the elevators and what have you, I think it's maybe a better deal right now to sell more off the field in soybeans than it is in wheat. And part of why I say that is, from the insurance standpoint, you have the price discovery this spring. So as long as producers chose the revenue protection, they would be protected. So that number, the spring projected price was at 10.16. So the discovery price for harvest price is going to be from October 1st through the 31st, so we won't know that number till later on. So, but we are sitting at 10.16 if they did happen to choose the revenue protection, because that's sort of like buying a put anyway. You're protected if the price goes down. So that's kind of why I would tend to sell more soybeans off the field than I would wheat at this point.
Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up. I was asked on RFD TV this week if beans were kind of like in no man's land, and I thought, I really think that they are, just from the standpoint that right now they're way below. You've got the revenue insurance, you've got basically a put option through that. You're really not into any type of resistance. There's cash prices just above $8 in a lot of areas, in some areas maybe even below that now. I think beans are going to have a hard time finding anybody really willing to sell based off of those factors. And we can talk marketing strategies later, but if you're a soybean producer and you can hold the beans for 6, 8 months, why wouldn't you do that and anticipate that we're going to get some sort of a agreement worked out with China where we can see a much better soybean prices than what we see today?
Right, and and that does go back to the producer's ability to store grain. That's a big factor, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know in our area, we've seen in the last, I would say 3-4 years anyway, there's been a lot of capital put into bins in this part of the country because there haven't been that many before. That kind of, you go back a decade or two, I think there was a lot more hauling to the elevator right off the field than there is now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right, let's move on, and we'll look at each commodity and a little bit deeper delve in here. I want to look first at world stocks, especially for the wheat number. We'll look at the bottom row. That's the world ending stocks for wheat. And this is a number here for wheat, 259. It's a little bit above the average trade guess. It is slightly down from last month, but I think this is the reason here why wheat sold off so hard today. We saw U.S. stocks decline for wheat, but the trade was surprised, I think, that from the standpoint, it's been dry in the European countries and they expected stocks would be down, and that has not shown up in this report. We're still seeing 259 million tons to 260 million tons, and reason why I thought the wheat market was down as hard as it was today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got world stocks for corn above average trade guess, for soybeans well above the average trade guess, and you can see why we were down as hard as we were today in the grain markets based off of this report. So we look at the corn market, Bruce. We've got all the numbers here that go into the bottom line, and I want to highlight just the bottom line numbers. The 1.684 of ending stocks. Delete that and use something else. 1.684 ending stocks, and some of the key numbers that jump out to me, and I want to see your thoughts if you agree, is right here we've got total usage of 14.98 billion bushels, total production of 14.58. So we are using more than what we can produce, and part of that is because of an increase in ethanol and increase in exports. So anything else jump out at you about this, Bruce?
Well, that's what I noticed right away too, was where we're using more than our production is, and I'm a little bit I don't know if you want to say skeptical is the right number for raising that export number to 125 million bushels. I mean, I have to wait and see it to believe it, I guess, is where I'm sitting.
Right. Yeah, I think they're definitely justified in increasing ethanol usage at 100 million bushels. This week alone, we had ethanol production sitting at the highest level, second highest level in history. So that we're definitely producing a lot, using a lot of ethanol. Our export business has been good, but they could easily change this back to the 2.25. Remember, in July they raised it by 250 million bushels, so we've seen about 375 million bushel increase in exports over the last 2 months reports.
And is China going to get our soybeans through a different channel, through other countries too? I mean,
yeah, well, let's look at the soybeans here now that you're talking about it. Some of the big numbers that jump out here at you. Of course, exports. That's a big one. They increased it by 20 million bushels. We had the production increase of 3.1 bushels per acre. Yeah. 4.2, and we're producing a bigger crop than what we're using. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say that. So the harvested acres haven't changed either throughout the year, really. So.
Yeah, no, we haven't seen much in the change. We could see some small changes after the FSA reports coming out. I think that's later this month or early September. When they certify acres, that gets reported here. That could be a small change, but what is one number that jumps out to you out of all these soybean numbers? if you had to, pick one thing to tell a client what's bearish about this report.
Well, it's got to be the production for me. I mean, just because they raised that bushels per acre as much as it was, I mean, between that and the ending stocks number, I guess production is just kind of, maybe others see it different than I do, but it just seems like a number that's ripe possibly for an adjustment later on.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up those two factors because I completely agree with you. There's two things that could majorly change by 6 months down the road. One is yield numbers get reduced because we don't have quite as much yield, or maybe they get increased. But ending stocks, they're at 785 million bushels, and we could see this export number change quite a bit before next year if there is an agreement where China ends up buying U.S. soybeans, that they could make an agreement where our exports increase quite substantially and draw some of these ending stocks down.
Yeah, right. So, like in the last few days, there really hasn't been any news on that. It just seems like each side has gotten a little bit harder stance. But I do believe, that this is probably a short-term issue with China, and I think something will eventually get worked out. But it's easy for me to say. I'm not the one sitting on all the cash crops, so we just got to try to figure out ways where we can help these clients get a decent floor under their price.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. At some point there's going to be an agreement reached, and it may take 4 months or 6 months, but at some point we're going to reach an agreement and hopefully put an end to this trade war and see better demand for U.S. soybeans at better pricing levels. Let's move on to wheat here, Bruce. And I know we've got a lot of numbers to talk about. I got a couple slides here. First one is the supply and demand numbers for wheat. Not any major changes here as far as acres or harvested acres, bushels per acre, just down just slightly overall. And ending stocks did fall a little bit as they increased exports. But let's actually look at some of the spring wheat numbers and overall wheat numbers here. The spring wheat, 614 million bushels of production. That's actually a little bit larger than what the average trade guess was, and it's unchanged from last month. So it's up substantially from the drought-ridden crop last year. Any numbers on the wheat crop, especially spring wheat, where you're located, jump out at you here, Bruce?
Well, when you go back to that production of, what was it, 48, what was the number?
I'll pull it
per acre. It was
for overall wheat. It was
yeah. No, I was just looking at the bushels per acre.
Yeah, 47.4 for wheat.
Okay. So I know that's an average across the country, but I know in our area we're gonna be north of that 65. I'm pretty sure. So the last weekend in July, I took a trip out to Minot and back. I took a couple of different routes. I went one way and came back another way. And I'll tell you what, I didn't really see much drop off, from our area driving that far out, 5 hours west of here. Just, obviously you're just looking at it from the road. You get a better idea, obviously, if you went and looked at it. But I'll tell you what, the crop looked just beautiful all the way from here, all the way to Minot and back.
Yeah, so, I know the market.
I don't know if that number will go up or not. So
I know the market here has really rallied recently on concerns about the world market, and if you look at the spread differences in some of the wheat classes, spring wheat classes, the D's, the March has really gained against some of the deferred months and taken a lot of the carry away for producers. I have a feeling we're going to start rebuilding that carry if the USDA is accurate in these yield numbers and our spring wheat crop is bigger than what had been anticipated prior to this.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the only thing I could see that spring number going up a little bit. So
any
marketing? Just my observation, on that. But
any marketing strategies as we go forward here, Bruce? Anything that corn, wheat, soybean producers should be looking at?
Well, I suppose, if at this stage of the game, I think we would be more interested in looking at options versus the futures, just because we live in an area where, with the big diversity, not the big dollar, not the big main crops like through the Midwest. Just in this area, people have been producers have had to be very conservative in their money management and stuff to survive, because the climate has kind of changed here a little bit, because a decade or so ago, there was a disaster declared in this area 7 out of every 10 years. So I guess when it comes to hedging, as far as any of this stuff right now, if they can store it, I would be more inclined to do that, even though some of them at harvest time do need to have some income coming, so they're going to have to do a little bit of selling off the field. And the ones that we have talked to have actually forward contracted, and anywhere from 10,000 bushels to 30,000 bushels we've been seeing as far as selling right off the field.
I think I want to add to that, Bruce, and say that, as far as the wheat market here goes, the U.S. has rallied, anticipating some world problems. We're priced out of the export market, and with the USDA telling us that world supplies are not shrinking at this point, wheat could have a pretty healthy correction here, I'm afraid. And if you're a producer combining spring wheat, hopefully if you haven't made some sales, we're still near multi-week highs. There's still opportunity, I think, to go ahead and do some if you need to make those sales right away at harvest.
And we had some of the guys that we knew still had some old crop last week when we had that nice spike on Thursday, I think it was last week. So we made some phone calls right away that morning, and they're needing to clean out their bin to make room for the next harvest. And those sales were relatively small compared to normal, so we got some of them to get some sold, and I think a couple of them that I talked to actually made a sale to get rid of everything they had left in the bin, 4,000 or 5,000 bushels, something like that. So they did take advantage last week of that little spike in price, and probably are pretty glad they did.
Should be glad they did. Absolutely. Yep. Bruce, it's been great having you on. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't you give our listeners your phone number if anybody has any questions and would like to talk about their insurance or their marketing needs?
Sure. Phone number here is area code 218-450-2129. And then my email address is bruce@northernaginc.com.
Very good. All right. Appreciate having you on, Bruce. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here today. This webinar will be back again in the September Supply and Demand Report. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your day.